Welcome to the third episode in a series where I talk about how to start different types of photography for under $1,000. That cost, however, doesn't include shipping because shipping prices depend on how close you are to a major city. Today we're talking about a photography setup to get started in portrait photography, and this time the setup includes lights, so that way you can shape the light to make your photo look even better. Now this specific setup is actually used to film this entire video, and it's been used to film the other videos on my channel as well. And at the end of the video, I'll have some tips on how to shoot professional looking portraits. First, let's start off with the camera. The camera we're recommending today is the same as the one used in episode 1 of this series, where we talked about landscape photography, which I'll leave a link to in the cards right now. That camera is the 200D Mark I because it can be found on eBay for $625. Now this camera has an EFS mount and therefore a 1.6 times crop, which allows you to use a 51.8 as your portrait lens, rather than a more expensive 85 1.8. This also means you can use EF lenses, and there are a wide variety of EF lenses for you to pick from, ranging from $100 to many tens of thousands of dollars. Now the downside of having a crop sensor is that the ISO performance is worse. It does come with a kit lens for that $625 price, however I don't recommend using it due to the poor optical quality and lack of depth of field. As I said in the last video, it takes a standard SD card, however it doesn't have a second card slot for redundant shooting, so if your card dies, you lose your photos. This is a photography video, but if you're after doing some casual video shooting on the side, it does up to 1080p 60, which means you can get some nice 2x slow motion, and it does shoot 24 FPS. Now the downside of this is that it doesn't shoot 4K, 6K or 8K. However, that's unimportant to most people, especially the average beginner who's using this camera. What is your favorite light budget photographers? Mine is the Godox SL60W, which I'll be getting soon, however it's out of the budget for this video. The lens I'm recommending you purchase is the 51.8 from Yongnuo. That's a cheap ripoff of the Canon 51.8, which is already cheap at $200. This Yongnuo version is only $100. Now remember earlier I mentioned the APS-C sensor? That makes this 51.8 lens an 81.8, which means it's as close as we're going to get to the 85mm sweet spot for portraits. Now most APS-C cameras are a 1.5 times crop, meaning that it's a 75mm focal length. And on a standard micro four thirds sensor, it's 100mm. For this video, the lens is used at f2.2 to let in a little less light and show more of the background. However, it does go down to f1.8 if you need low light performance or you want to completely blur out the background. Now of course for $100, the build quality is not very good and the autofocus is subpar, and it's definitely not as good as the Canon 51.8 in those categories. However, if you take good care of it, you'll be getting good images out of this lens for years to come. Now let's move on to lighting. As some of you may know, lighting is much more important than the quality of your camera and lens. In this video, I'm recommending you buy the newer reflector kit, which allows you to shape light and diffuse harsh sunlight so you get a nice soft look. I will have a video on hard versus soft light soon, so make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss that. Now harsh light can be used creatively, but I don't recommend it because it's much harder to get good photos. The reflector kit is $47, which is a steal in my opinion. Now if you're shooting indoors and want high quality light still, I recommend you buy two 2-packs to get a total of 4 of the newer USB LED lights. They are dimmable and at 5600 Kelvin, so you get a nice daylight look when mixing with sunlight. These 2-packs, along with the reflector kit, are what I'm using to light my videos. And the lights are $48 for the 2-packs, so $100 for both of the 2-packs, giving you 4 lights. I have 2 going through the reflector for my key light because one is not bright enough after put through diffusion, one as a hair light, and one as my background light using the included gels. When using the gels, make sure to peel the plastic off both sides. It's hard to see it, but it is there. The reason I still recommend getting the reflector diffusion kit is because the diffusion layer included with the lights does nothing more than protect the LEDs, so I still recommend having it on there, but it doesn't really do anything to help with the quality of your light. Because the gels are so flimsy, make sure to have the diffusion layer between the gel and the LEDs so that way the LEDs don't get damaged by accident, because the gels will not protect it. Now for the background, I recommend getting creative outside or inside your house to create a nice looking unique backdrop. However, if you're after the same wood texture that I have, I recommend this $23 off-brand backdrop from Amazon. And if you iron out the creases in it, it looks a lot more realistic than it does in my videos. And if you want to mount the backdrop to your wall, I recommend the newer 3 backdrop roll holder, which I have. Just factor in the cost of a PVC pipe to keep the backdrop on the backdrop holder. Now finally, in terms of tripod, I don't specifically have the tripod I recommend, but according to reviews it's pretty good. Just make sure to do your own research first. but it's $34 on Amazon, and it seems to be good enough for basic portrait photography. Though I do recommend, if you can, going handheld because you'll be able to get more creative angles easier. Now out of the $1,000 we have $4 left over. Now here are some tips for shooting portraits for beginners. First tip, don't shoot at f1.8. The only time you should be shooting at f1.8 is if you're in a low light situation where you don't have enough light to shoot at a tighter aperture. The reason I don't recommend shooting at f1.8 is because the background becomes too blurred and it looks unnatural and like you had no time to create a proper background, so you put no effort into it, creating an unprofessional amateur look. Tip number 2 is to create depth in your shot. 2 ways to do this are pulling your subject away from the wall and turning on a hair light. So here's with a hair light and without a hair light, and with the hair light again. Now my third tip is don't over edit. Most professionals get their raw files nearly completely finished out of camera, and editing is only to add the final finishing touches such as a tiny bit of contrast and saturation. When you're editing, don't turn the texture, clarity or sharpening slider up too high, otherwise it looks too digital and fake. And don't add so much skin retouching in Photoshop that it looks like an alien with perfect skin, not a human being. The bottom line in editing is to make your photo look more natural, not less natural. One tip I learned from Peter McKinnon is to do something else for 5 minutes before exporting your photo. That way you can look over it with fresh eyes and then make adjustments. Then repeat the process until you have something that looks good for you to export.